Welcome back to another episode of Bill Hanna Baking. Today I'll be making a blueberry cheesecake. It does look a little complicated, but it's really not. It's just the crust, the filling, and the sauce. We'll break down every stage and we'll get you to the end. Check out the ingredients below and make sure to follow along. Let's get started with some prep work. We're gonna preheat our ovens at 350 degrees and we're gonna prep our pans so we're ready to go. I'm using an 8-inch springform pan because we're gonna put this in a larger pan as we're gonna be baking this in a water bath. I'm first going to cover the bottom of the pan in parchment paper so that it helps me with the release later on. Then on the outside of the springform pan, I'm going to cover it up the walls with tinfoil as much as possible so the water from the water bath doesn't get into the cake. The main idea being that we're trying to make the outside of the pan as watertight as possible. To help with the release of the cake later on, I've cut these strips of parchment paper that are going to line the inside of the pan. You can also use a spray oil here as well if you don't want to take this step. I've sprayed the side previously just so the parchment paper can have something to stick to. Put that to the side and we're gonna get started on our actual cake. For the crust, just mix your graham cracker crumbs or biscuit crumbs together with your unsalted melted butter. We're going to use this to press into the base of the pan and up the sides if you want it to go up the sides. I personally don't like to do that. I like to just have it as a flat bottom. Next, we're going to work on our cheesecake filling. Now there's a bit of technique to this and I'm going to go through it as simply as possible. Two issues often pop up when baking a cheesecake. One is the cheesecake itself cracks when you take it out of the oven. And two is the top of the cheesecake isn't level, so sometimes it's a bit unsightly or it makes it tough to top it. We're going to address both these issues. I should also add, this isn't a big deal. Neither of these issues affect the flavor of the cheesecake, so it doesn't really matter if it happens to your cheesecake. It's just an aesthetic thing more than anything else. First, let's make sure that all our ingredients for the cheesecake filling are room temperature. This is important so everything mixes well together and there aren't weird temperature variations. So that means that we need to take out the cream cheese, the sour cream, and the eggs out of the fridge a couple of hours before we start. Using the paddle attachment on my stand mixer, I'm going to beat the cream cheese until it's smooth. You don't really want to go longer than 20 to 30 seconds here. You just want to get to the point where it's smooth and then stop. You don't want to overbeat because you're adding a lot of air into the mixture if you overbeat the cream cheese. If a lot of air is incorporated into the mixture, this is what's going to cause some collapsing of the cake when you're baking it. It's not the biggest deal in the world. Again, it's just more of an aesthetic thing, but we can also address this later on at the end of our batter. This is a good time in the recipe to get the water for our water bath hot. So get that going in whatever method you're going to get boiling water. Next, we're going to add in our flour, vanilla, sour cream, sugar, and optional lemon zest. Again, we're going to beat this just until it's combined. This is probably also a good time to stop, scrape down the bowl, make sure everything is incorporated and not getting stuck on the edges, and then beat again, just until it's combined. We want to reduce our beating time as much as possible. Now we're going to incorporate our eggs one at a time, beating in between. So pour in one egg, make sure it's incorporated, next egg, so on. Now your batter is ready and we're going to pour it into our pan. At this point, if you notice any bubbles in the batter, you can shake the pan a little bit or just kind of jiggle it because we want to get those air bubbles out of the mixture as much as possible. That way we'll avoid a future collapse. Onto the water bath component of our bake. Make sure your tin foil is at a good level here. You want it at least an inch or two above your pan, just so that we can make sure that as little water gets into the cake as possible. Pour your hot water in. Obviously don't exceed the top of your tin foil. You don't really want to get water into the cake or near the cake's pan. The point of the water bath here is that we can make sure that the temperature is as steady as possible. This will help the outside of the cake bake at the same rate as the inside of the cake inside the oven. When you don't use a water bath, the outside of the cake bakes faster than the inside, and that's why sometimes you can see a cheesecake bake, but it dips in the middle. Get that cake into the oven. We're targeting approximately 70 to 80 minutes here. We're going to watch it near the end of the cook because we want a light brown top on the top of the cake. Once you start to see the cake top turn golden brown or slightly start to brown, this is when we can turn off the oven. Crack the door open a little bit and let the cake sit in there cooling down while it's inside the oven. This slow temperature decrease is what's going to help make sure that the cake top doesn't crack. After 2 hours or so of cooling down, we should notice that the cake and the pan are no longer hot to the touch. Once it's room temperature, we can get that cake into the refrigerator. We're going to leave this overnight or at least for 4 hours. We want this cake to be cold before we start applying the topping to it. I leave it uncovered in the refrigerator because I want the top to make sure it kind of dries out a little bit because there's still going to be some moisture in the cake. Now let's get our cake out of the springform pan and get it ready for the blueberry sauce. Before I make the sauce, I just want to say it doesn't hurt to make a little bit of extra sauce. You can can it for use later, you can have it for toppings, you can add it to pancakes, you can add it to waffles. But as you notice with a bunch of my other recipes, I make more than necessary of the toppings, sometimes because I'm a little gluttonous or I just want to use it in some other fashion. Let's get a saucepan going to about medium heat. We're going to combine half the blueberries, the vanilla, sugar, and lemon juice. Let it simmer until the blueberries break down. Outside the pan, we're going to mix our cornstarch and water. Now we're going to pour it into our blueberry mixture, and you'll notice it starts to thicken up a little bit. Now we can stir in the remaining blueberries, and the sauce should start to become a little bit more of a syrup consistency. Now the sauce is ready. I should have let it cool a little bit before I applied it to the cold cake, but I applied it right away and will be putting it into the fridge. You'll notice it doesn't make that much of a difference, but the proper way to do it is to let the sauce cool down a little bit so it can thicken and then apply it to the cake. Get the cake into the fridge for another hour or two. I made this cake for Blue Monday. What better way to get yourself out of a funk than eating some delicious cheesecake? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you when I see ya.